created. And I think that actually is a good segue into sort of the meat of what we wanted to talk about today, which is we're looking at how developmentalists, we like to use case studies a lot in studying development because of the way that case studies give us a nuanced insight into an individual's experience. And that's something that resonates with me as somebody who really likes Vygotsky. And don't get me wrong, I think there's definitely areas to criticize with Vygotsky, especially when you get into the sort of clinical psychology end of things. But that there is this sense of, in a case study, being able to really pick apart specific factors and events, and not to lean too hard into your work, but to think about like how we can identify particular factors that an individual has encountered or engaged with that tell us a story and help us kind of understand where this individual is and where we might be able to identify where they are developmentally and what areas they might need help with, or areas that we might want to lean into because that's an area of particular strength for them.
Yeah, I think it has to do with frameworks. It's not a question of any one theory is not going to provide all the answers, but it might provide answers for certain types of individuals, and certain types of situations, at certain stages of life. So I think that's an aspect of it. It's a question of trying to find a theory that's a framework that works in terms of explaining or helping, providing areas of intervention for a particular individual. It's particularized. It's not necessarily something one size doesn't fit all.
Yeah.
One theory might apply to one person very effectively and not to someone else, and so on. And it has a lot to do with the dynamics of a person's own life and so on, in terms of what fits.
And as a clinical psychologist, I wonder what your thoughts are on how case study fits into the realm of sort of education research, developmental human development research. How does that fit in relation to, like, what I think a lot of people think of when we talk about research is they think kind of immediately very quantitatively. How do you see case studies as a particular venue for understanding, particularly in clinical spaces?
Yeah, well, most of my background really has been in the area of quantitative research. I've been involved really in developing psychological tests, a number of them over the years and so on. But more recently, I've become more and more interested in case studies. Particularly, I've got into this area of the S factor and so on, in terms of looking at how the S factor could be of assistance in framing or helping us understand or provide bases for change in individuals. And I think that that's the aspect of it, is that it provides basically a way of helping us understand a person, or the person to understand themselves and so on, and to provide avenues of intervention, ways of helping them, suggestions and so on, in terms of things that could work for this person. It's not necessarily an answer, but it's a possibility of answers.
Well, and I think one of the things that I find valuable about case studies, I think they help us humanize the sort of broader data and to make it more practical.
Yeah.
Because we have to acknowledge that case studies are not in and of themselves generalizable.
Yeah.
However, they can provide sort of sample context for us to put in and understand where the quantitative, where these sort of bigger studies and trends that are being seen, so we can see how an individual either, like you were saying, fits in or doesn't. How do we pick the right sort of data that's going to help this individual? And if at the end of the day, hopefully we are going to see the people that we teach, the people that we interact with, the people we have relationships with, as whole human beings and as individuals who we can't just be like, well, you're an INFP, And it's not that I'm not about to go into this argument about whether or not that enneagrams or those models of personality traits, et cetera, are valuable. I think they create talking points, right? But the moment we kind of pigeonhole somebody, and I think something about case studies is that it does help you kind of get away from the pigeonholing. Would you say that that's...
Oh, very much so. I think it's real. It's real life in a sense. It's looking at the individual as an individual who's multifaceted and so on, who may or may not fit into a particular category or be an exception. And I think that's really, really true in terms of a lot of the research we look at has to do with generalities and so on. But we're looking at a case study specifics in terms of how a particular individual may fit a particular category or not. or in what ways are they different? So for those were perhaps part of a norm.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so to kind of I want to move on because I know we've only got so much time and I don't want to keep people here too long. But one of the things that we've been talking about is kind of formulating a case study. And what I've kind of done is I'm pulling from a series of experiences that I've had, both as an individual, but especially as a teacher who works with twice exceptional individuals, as a twice exceptional individual who has a kiddo who has fairly recently been fully assessed in ways that show that there's neurological differences at work as well as what
Right.
we would call giftedness.
Right.
And so getting into developmental human development, thinking about the stories of that really intrigues me. And as an example, and kind of to bring together those experiences, I would posit that let's say we have an individual, we'll call her Nora. We'll just, give her this. And this is something we do. We always change names because we would never want an
Right.
individual to find themselves, doxxed because they participated. Even if it makes them look good, it still is problematic to the way people
Right.
engage with the information. So, say you have Nora who is now somewhere around like 10 or 11 years old. And we have seen, and her parents have always kind of had this sense of like, oh, well, she's just an interesting character, and there's been this sense of like from childhood where you've got a kiddo who Nora learned to read really early on, at like 2 years old, started just picked it up, was like, this is my thing. Um, and then, and just fell in love with books and stuff and did all the things that you're like, oh my goodness, we've got a reader and we didn't even have to really work at it.
Right.
And literacy people rejoice, right? While the science of reading people go, wait, they need to know things. And so you have this individual who, there's actually even a term hyperlexic
Mhm.
for kids who kind of really grab onto that process really early.
Right.
But then we see that person has difficulty starting with a task. Like if we say, hey, can you do this? Can you help mommy and daddy do this? Right. And they go, uh-huh. And then they pick up a book and sit down,
Right.
you know,
Right.
and then you go, hey, it's time to do the thing. Oh, okay. And they're back at their book.
Yeah. Right.
And this is something, and then mom and dad will be like, oh, well, I don't want to stop her from reading. So they set the book aside, right? And they very kindly, were like, hey, we're gonna set this aside for the moment. But right now we need to do this other thing. And she comes along. But then like throughout the process, let's say it's help, she's helping set the table. She's you say, okay, go grab the plates. And she comes back with the plates. And we'll say at this point, maybe Nora's like 6 or so. And she goes and grabs the plates. And then she sets them down on the counter. And then kind of goes over and begins pulling out the spoons and forks and stuff, and then sets those in a different place on the counter. And then eventually, and after a minute, like she's like, oh, I'm thirsty. And then goes and get a glass of water and asks for a glass of water. And then while she's drinking the water, goes, oh, my book, and goes back to her book. So,
Right.
so then, but so like then and it's like, well, like you've got the 6-year-old who's struggling to like maintain and do this thing, or even let's say it's something that she wants to do. Let's say it's, hey, I've got this really cool book. Let's read it together. And then like in the middle of reading the first chapter, she's up and moving and is like, oh, daddy, let me tell you about this one time that I did this thing at school. It was really cool. And like that. And it's like, okay, well, but are we reading the book? Oh, yeah. Let's read the book together.
Yeah.
So we've got this going on. And so we've got this individual who's hyperlexic. And we've got this individual um who's struggling to follow through with things. And I think, this is, and I know I'm pulling from a relatively common sort of trope. And then, but I do want to add one more thing. We talk to the teacher and we find out that um, that Nora sometimes actually will kind of get really frustrated when the teacher is like, "Hey, we're gonna do this now," and they're like, "But I'm doing this other thing that I'm doing," or is gung ho to do it, but then just like doesn't. And then the teacher also notices that like anytime that they've got an eraser, they start kind of moving it and pulling it and pushing it around and setting it
Mhm.
and it's and crumbling it and they're and so they can't keep eraser. Nora can't have an eraser,
Mhm.
you know. And so then like as she's writing, you know, she's always asking for somebody to lend her eraser, and then
Right.
if it stays with her for a period of time, the eraser gets destroyed, you know. And so but we find ways to sort of allow for that, but then as a result of sort of these things, she starts to fall a little bit behind at
Right.
times when it comes to completing stuff for class. And like with math, like maybe she does a few problems but then kind of just stops. And we don't know whether or not she actually you know, teachers like, I don't know if she actually understands the concept or not, because like I can only see that she sort of she did the problem that we did as a group, and then she did one more, but that's not the whole assignment, you know. And then we start to see, and then I'll add on one other thing that I've seen a lot of is that when Nora finds herself sort of on the outs, sort of finding that she's not in sync with the rest of the class and what's going on, she gets really upset. And she, when you ask her, is like, well, I don't have any friends. And the other kids make fun of me. And my teacher hates me because, you know, so much of and that when you talk to her, you know, you find that like, you know, kids are inviting her to do stuff.
Mhm.
And then she doesn't, you know, participate in the way they expect. And then they go, well, if you want to do it your way, okay, well, we're going to go do something different, you know. But then she takes that as a personal rejection,
Right.
you know, and sees that as um kind of this like being just wrong, and like people just not liking her, and like and being very worried about, you know, stuff. And then begins to like not even start to do some of her assignments now at like 10 years old. Sometimes she just work just doesn't happen, like
Mhm.
and it can even be something that a teacher has gone out of their way to like, um she's really into unicorns, right? So the teacher creates an assignment about unicorns, and it's a like close reading assignment. So she's thinking, oh man, Nora's gonna knock this out of the park. And she gives the assignment to Nora and says, okay, Nora, I want you to go through and read this, and I want you to find all the cool things about unicorns that this story is telling you. And then and Nora sits down to read, and the teacher comes back, and Nora's sad. And the teacher goes, oh well, we're all done with our time now. What'd you do? And Nora hasn't written anything down. And when asked, like, well, what did you learn about unicorns? Nora's like, I don't know. And this sort of dynamic happens more and more often where Nora will just, it'll just seem like something happens and she just doesn't engage with something, even
Mhm.
something that she used to really like and used to be seen as somebody who really excelled at. And now she's seeing the situation in which it she starts to say, well, I'm just not good at that. I can I
Right.
can't. I can't do
Right.
it.
Mhm.
And a teacher and a parent and friends are like, well, but we've seen you do this before. And so that, I think that brings us to sort of
Right.
present day moment of a teacher and a family going, oh, here's this really, you know, she was ahead of the game in so many ways, but like she's just fine out of sync.